Okay, welcome to the Crow Discovery Project. We are going to take a historical look through a bunch of black haloed UFOs transiting the moon and close out with the second best lunar wave I've ever filmed. But first, let's get some context. Okay, so although I've said this many times, I'm going to again illustrate what we're talking about when I show you the objects that I'm filming transiting the moon. Here is the moon loaded up close to full in stellarium. Okay, what it is basically half a degree of sky. So let me zoom out, put it with some reference to the ground. So right here is the moon. That's how much sky we're talking about. And to further put this into perspective, if you take your pinky and stick it straight up and hold your hand at arm's length, you can cover, from your point of view, you can cover the moon with your little finger. So this is just a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of sky. Look at all that sky. All that. This little tiny thing right here is the moon, and we have all this sky. So all the things that I am filming transiting the moon are occurring in this one little pinpoint. So I'm stating this again just so people have a frame of reference. Okay, so we're going to look at about 10 black haloed objects from 2012 up to 2014. And I'll tell you where they're coming in. This one's from the right, and we will take a couple views on each of these. These objects all have some similar traits in common, and we'll break that down as I come to stills that I was able to take on some of these. And you'll notice there is a solid core that you cannot see through, and there are actually two outer halos on most of these objects. Some are easier to see than others, depending on how big they are and which camera I shot them with. That was shot with an 8-inch telescope and a Canon T2i. Coming in at the upper left here, this one is very small, but it too has a double halo. It is difficult to see. It's easiest when it first comes in, and when you get it into Photoshop, you can see. Now, there's some rules. Oh, by the way, whenever you see that, it means I took a still. The reason I'm taking a still is because with certain cameras it'll be 5,000 to 7,000 pixels wide when a video frame is only 1920 pixels wide. So taking a still gives you much more resolution. So whenever you see a jump like that, it's because I clicked off a still in the middle of the video, which interrupted it. Okay, coming in, where are we here? Oh yeah, left. And this one is very fuzzy. But what I was about to say is the slower an object is, the higher the orbit should be by the rules we have been handed. In other words, something in low Earth orbit should be whipping by at thousands of miles an hour. Something in geosynchronous should be moving very slowly, if at all, and that's about 22,000 miles up, we are told. And I keep stressing that because what we see here is if you pay attention to the size of each of these things, you would think the closer it is to you, the bigger it would be. And so then it would be a bit faster. But what we see is the very biggest ones are the slowest, which doesn't make any sense at all. And this is a pretty good example. This again was shot with the 8-inch telescope with a Canon T2i with only 18 megapixels. There's a second one coming in there at the left. This was a double header. If you follow me and you saw Richard 205 Maria's footage of these black haloed objects, we saw two of them very close together. Alright, this was shot with a 12-inch telescope with the new Nikon D800, and there it comes across center frame. This is a very clear image taken with a camera that has 36 megapixels. So we can really zoom in on this, and I lifted a couple stills out of this image for that reason. And here it comes at the right. So we see these things, we look them up, we can never find these as listed satellites, and we're asking, what are these things? They don't look like any satellites I've ever seen pictures of, and I look all the time to see if I can see, some weird new satellite, but almost all satellites have solar panels of some sort. There are some that do not, but they don't look like this. And to be honest with you, low Earth orbit, if we say it starts at, say, 160 miles, to be picking up something like this at 160 miles away, it would have to be a pretty large object. And that's just low Earth orbit. They're telling us, and here's a picture of the halos, the inner core, the outer halo, and then the very outer diffuse halo. But I have a better example of this, which is the last object we'll look at before the lunar wave. It's the biggest black haloed UFO we ever filmed, and the slowest. This again was shot with a 12-inch telescope and the Nikon with 36 megapixels, and just look how slow that thing is going. So anyone who looks at this, like when they did the Huffington Post article, the FBI guy and other people came on and said, oh, that's absolutely a satellite in geosynchronous orbit. Well, I did calculations on how big this thing would be. It was either this one or the clip before, I forget which, probably the clip before. And it turns out that if this was in geosynchronous orbit, it would be 3 times larger than we are told the International Space Station is. So it just doesn't make much sense. None of it does. And just saying this is a satellite with, no information, it doesn't make sense to me. Besides the fact that they don't look like anything we've been shown. Coming in at the right here, headed for the bottom of the frame. Here's a good dark version of one of these black haloed objects. If you take a close look at that, you can kind of see the halo-y electromagnetic looking glow around it. This is a very good example of that. Coming in at the right. And here he comes. They're just very interesting, and we've been filming these things for years. And sometimes you can see that the kind of what I describe as an electromagnetic halo look around it is thinner in front of the object than on the trailing edge many times. Okay, this was shot with an 8-inch telescope coming from the upper left to center frame. 8-inch telescope and a Canon T2i with 18 megapixels. This object looks like it's speed blurring, but when the camera shifts for a second, you can tell that the object is perfectly round as the camera pan temporarily matches the speed of the object. Right here, it almost looks like it's leaving a trail of sorts at certain points in the frame if you watch carefully and have a good big monitor. But right there, there's a couple spots where it just looks perfectly round as the camera moves a little bit, probably matching the speed of the object. Coming in at the upper left, headed to the lower right of the frame. This again was shot way back in 2012 with the 8-inch telescope and the Canon T2i. And I didn't post any of the full spectrum versions of these because I just posted videos from the full spectrum camera not long ago, along with Richard 205 Maria's video of 2 of these things in tandem, going through frame very quickly at high magnification. So that brings us to the biggest black haloed UFO that we've ever seen. It's also probably the slowest and the best example of the double halo that we see on these objects. Coming in at the right, about center frame. And where are you? There you are. Here it comes. And there's going to be 2 jumps here because I took stills to get 5,000 pixel wide stills that I could zoom in on, which was well worth it in this case, and you'll see why in a moment. It's just crazy to see something like this. It's moving so slowly that it should be, according to the rules we're handed, thousands of miles away from us. On the top, you can see I've circled the halos, and then I've left the still without the lines on the bottom, and then the frame that was 5,000 pixels wide, that's the little image on the right that's not zoomed. So what you see is a very outer diffuse halo that kind of drags longer behind the object. Then you see the inner halo, and then a red-tinged core, which is often the case with these things. If you put them in Photoshop, and sometimes you need to brighten them a little bit, nothing more, you can see a red tinge on that core. We're going to take another look at this object, coming in at the right. This is just a very, very interesting object. Looks like nothing I've ever seen described, or any satellite or anything else I've ever been told about or seen images of. This is slowed down to 50%. But look at that trailing kind of electric magnetic halo and that red tinge on the core. There's where I clicked the still while the video was running. That's going to happen one more time here. I got 2 stills out of this. There's the other still. And then the object goes on its way. This is this is the conundrum. Are all these objects the same types of things at different distances from me? If that is true, then how can it be that this one is so much larger and slower? It should be smaller and slower, or larger and faster. So you can see the conundrum here. Coming in at the right one last time on this object before we look at the lunar wave. and this is in real time. And again, look at that kind of trailing electromagnetic halo look. It's very bluish in this one, but that is probably due to the city light filter that I was using on the telescope at the time. I'm not sure if it was used on this clip, but it may well have been. I think it may have been. All right, now we're going to look at probably the second best lunar wave ever captured, coming in from the top. And there's the first wave. Here comes the second one right behind it, top to bottom. And then I'm going to load it up again at 50% speed and track the wave so you can see it all the way to the edge of the frame. Coming in at the top. There's the first wave. Tracking back up to the top. Here comes the second wave right now. Alright, now I'm going to load it and run a couple filters to get a look at it. Now this has become a cottage industry to debunk this, and the truth is the 2012 footage, which is not this footage, is the best by miles. But it is probably the most, well, absolutely the most studied video clip that I've ever shot. And what I see in a lot of the debunking is people just simply ignoring things that we know are true now. And a lot of airplanes did this, which is a bit baffling because you can hear and see an airplane coming for minutes before it transits the moon. We see it happen all the time, and we get ready to try to film the plane as it transits the moon. Unless these are invisible magical planes that don't make any noise, I don't even know how that's a possible debunk. But anyhow, there's the second best lunar wave. So there it is. My fourth article is now up on the Higher Side chat. There will be a link to it down in the description. And thanks for watching. Cheers.